Move, cripple! A cruel kick struck her chair, sending it rolling dangerously close to the wooden edge of the Santa Monica Pier. Strangers watched in frozen silence. And then, like a storm rising from the horizon, the roar of engines filled the air. A sea of leather-clad bikers began to surround. Move, cripple! The words cut sharper than the kick that rattled her chair. Her body lurched forward, wheels squeaking as she fought to hold balance on the pier's worn planks. A gasp swept the crowd, but no one moved. Tourists stared. Some whispered. Most looked away. And for a fragile moment, it seemed the cruelty would go unanswered. Her name was Elena, 19 years old, a girl whose life had already carried the weight of battles most adults never faced. She wore her hair in a braid that fell over her shoulder, her hands resting steady on the rims of her wheelchair. Her silence was not weakness. It was the quiet strength of someone who had learned that dignity does not require a raised voice. But silence in the face of cruelty can feel like standing alone at the edge of the world. The boys who taunted her laughed. Their sneakers scraped the wood as they circled, spitting words meant to humiliate. "You're in the way," one sneered. "This pier isn't made for people like you." Another shoved the back of her chair, wheels spinning as Elena clutched the armrest. Around them, strangers pretended to be busy. Some fumbled with phones, others turned their faces toward the ocean. The shame of indifference pressed heavier than the insults themselves. Elena's story had not begun here. She was the daughter of a Marine who never returned home from deployment. A car accident years later left her paralyzed, forcing her into a life she never chose. Yet even as her body betrayed her, she refused to let despair define her. She became a quiet soldier in her own right, rolling forward each day with resolve that outshone her pain. When she breathed in the salt air of Santa Monica, she often imagined her father walking beside her. She carried him in silence, believing every step she could no longer take. He still walked in her stead. But now, on that pier, she carried not just her grief, but the heavy sting of public humiliation. Her heart pounded in her chest. She tasted metal on her tongue, fear mixing with defiance. She wanted to scream, but her voice remained trapped in the cage of her ribs. Instead, she straightened her back, eyes fixed on the horizon, as if daring the waves themselves to bear witness. And then came the sound. Low at first, like distant thunder. The rumble of engines rolled across the boardwalk. Heads turned. Tourists paused. Even the boys stopped their jeers, unsettled by the vibrations beneath their feet. From the far end of the pier, a wall of motorcycles appeared, chrome gleaming under the afternoon sun, black leather jackets marked with patches of brotherhood and grit. Dozens of bikers, riding in formation, the kind of sight that pulled respect out of anyone who watched. The boys laughed nervously, unsure, but Elena's eyes softened, because she recognized the patch on their jackets. Her father's best friend had ridden with this group. Veterans, protectors, men and women who carried not just steel on two wheels, but loyalty deeper than blood. They were known for appearing when silence became too heavy for one person to bear. The bikers slowed as they reached the scene. Engines growled, then stilled in unison. Boots struck the wooden planks as riders dismounted, their presence forming a silent circle around Elena. Not one word was spoken. Not one threat was voiced. Their silence was heavier than any shout. The crowd that once looked away now leaned in, pulled by the gravity of justice taking shape. One of the bullies stepped back, muttering, "We were just joking." His voice cracked, lost against the wall of quiet stairs. Another shuffled nervously, eyes darting toward escape. But the circle held, steady, unbreakable. It was not fists or fury that disarmed them. It was dignity. It was the weight of silent honor, the kind Elena herself had carried alone until now. Elena lifted her chin, her voice finally breaking free. "Respect costs nothing," she said. The words, simple yet sharp, sliced through the air. One of the bikers repeated them softly, and soon they echoed in a ripple around the circle. Respect costs nothing. The boys lowered their heads. Their laughter had vanished, replaced by the sting of shame. With the crowd now watching, not in silence, but in solidarity, they retreated down the pier, their footsteps hurried and small. For the first time that afternoon, Eleanor was not alone. The bikers did not cheer. They did not gloat. Instead, one of them placed a hand gently on Elena's shoulder, a silent vow that she was seen, that her father's memory lived not just in her heart, but in this brotherhood that still carried him. The circle opened slowly, and as the tourists began to clap, it was not applause for intimidation, it was gratitude for dignity restored. Elena's chair faced the ocean again. The sun dipped lower, painting the horizon gold. She whispered words meant only for herself, though the sea carried them far. Strength is not in walking. Strength is in standing, even when standing still. Another voice behind her answered, firm and steady, and no one stands alone. The pier that had been heavy with silence now hummed with something different. Respect. Families walked past and nodded toward her. Children smiled. Strangers who once turned away now looked her in the eye, not with pity, but with honor. The sea of bikers mounted their motorcycles once more, engines roaring to life. But before they left, they saluted Elena with a gesture known only to those who lived by unspoken codes. It was a promise, a declaration. Dignity will always be defended. Then, like a tide receding, they rolled away, leaving behind not emptiness, but strength. Elena sat at the pier's edge, the world softer now. She felt her father's presence more than ever, not in memory alone, but in the living brotherhood that still carried his name. The lesson of that day was carved into her heart, and into the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. Silent strength has the power to move mountains. Respect is not a gift. It is a duty. And so the story closes with a truth that should echo in every ear. Respect costs nothing, but it can change everything. Every silent battle deserves recognition. Every act of dignity deserves respect. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what this story meant to you. And if you believe in honoring strength, courage, and dignity, subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of silent heroes.